Silence, Londoners learned, was more frightening than noise. On the morning of June 13, 1944, just 1 week after Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, a new sound crept across the skies of southeast England. It was not the steady drone of bombers or the rising wail of air raid sirens. This was something stranger, an uneven, mechanical rattling, like a motorcycle engine bolted to a bomb. It grew louder, closer, and then it stopped. Seconds later, London exploded. Adolf Hitler called it Vergeltungswaffe 1, Vengeance Weapon 1. Britons gave it simpler names: the buzz bomb, the doodlebug, the V-1. Whatever you called it, this pilotless aircraft marked a terrifying shift in warfare. Unlike the Luftwaffe bombers of the Blitz, there was no crew to fight, no formation to disrupt, no pilot whose morale might crack. This was a machine with a gyroscope for a brain and 1,870 pounds of explosive in its nose, sent on a one-way journey toward civilians. The V-1's design was brutally efficient. About 25 feet long, with stubby wings and a crude pulse jet engine perched above its fuselage, it was engineered for mass production, not elegance. Air slammed through spring-loaded shutters, mixed with fuel, ignited, and blasted out the rear 50 times per second. The result was the sound that haunted Britain, a buzzing roar that told anyone listening they had perhaps 15 seconds to live once it cut out. That countdown kept Air Chief Marshal Roderick Hill awake at night. The V-1 cruised at roughly 340 miles per hour, skimming along at 2,000 to 3,000 feet. German launch crews in occupied France simply pointed them toward London and fired them off. No pilot training. No aircraft recovery. No risk. They were cheap, fast to build, and launched by the dozen every day. Britain's air defense system, so effective in 1940, suddenly looked obsolete. Observer posts struggled to track such small, fast targets. Anti-aircraft guns filled the sky, but hitting something the size of a small car moving faster than 300 miles per hour was extraordinarily difficult. In the first week alone, 73 V-1s struck London, killing over 500 civilians. The psychological toll was worse than the damage. During the Blitz, people heard bombers coming. They watched searchlights sweep the sky, fighters clash overhead. The V-1 offered none of that. It arrived alone, at any hour. You heard the buzz. You froze. You waited for silence. And then you prayed the explosion would land somewhere else. By the end of June, more than 2,000 V-1s had been launched, and nearly 70% were getting through. Fighter Command needed a solution. Immediately. The problem was not courage. It was speed. Operational research delivered grim conclusions. The Spitfire Mk.V, hero of the Battle of Britain, could reach about 370 miles per hour under ideal conditions. But scrambles were never ideal. Pilots had to climb, accelerate, and chase a target already at full speed on a straight course. Often, by the time they closed in, the V-1 had already crossed the coast. Pilots had only 3 to 5 minutes to intercept and destroy the bomb before it reached London. The Hurricane fared worse. With a top speed around 320 miles per hour, it could only catch a V-1 by diving from above. Squadron leader Jean Meridor managed exactly that on June 20th, using altitude and gravity to destroy one, but such opportunities were rare. The improved Spitfire Mk9, with its more powerful Merlin engine, offered hope. Capable of nearly 400 miles per hour, pilots from number 91 and number 3 squadrons began scoring kills. But the danger remained extreme. The V-1's pulse jet ran hot, and closing to firing range meant flying directly into its exhaust. Several pilots learned the hard way that detonating the warhead at close range could be fatal. On June 23rd, Flight Lieutenant Maurice Rose fired from just 100 yards. The V-1 exploded instantly. The blast flipped his Spitfire upside down at under 500 feet. Rose survived. Others that week did not. Ammunition was another problem. Fighter cannons carried limited rounds, and pilots often emptied their guns trying to bring down a single flying bomb. The V-1's simple structure absorbed damage that would have destroyed a manned aircraft. Some pilots reported hitting 4 or 5 V-1s without a confirmed kill. By the end of June, The numbers told a brutal story. Of 2,750 V-1s launched, anti-aircraft guns destroyed 261, fighters 444. More than 2,000 still reached Britain. And the launches were increasing, over 100 per day. Hill needed faster aircraft, based closer to the coast, intercepting over the channel. Speed was no longer an advantage. It was survival. The answer was already waiting on airfields in Kent and Sussex, where ground crews struggled with an aircraft as powerful as it was temperamental. The Hawker Tempest MKV, introduced only weeks earlier, had been designed for low-level dominance. Now it was about to face its true test. Powered by the massive Napier Sabre, a 24-cylinder, sleeve-valve engine producing over 2,180 horsepower, the Tempest could reach 435 miles per hour at altitude. Against the V-1, it finally offered hope. But there was a catch. The V-1 didn't fly at altitude. It flew low, right where the Tempest's performance dropped, and where every mile per hour had to be fought for. And that was the problem Fighter Command was about to confront. That margin, those few desperately needed miles per hour, came at a price. The Tempest MKV was fast, but it was also heavy. Fully armed, it carried 162 gallons of fuel and ammunition for 4 Hispano 20mm cannons, far more mass than a Spitfire. To claw back speed, some pilots began launching with reduced fuel loads, gambling that the interception would be brief. Often it was. Sometimes it wasn't. More than one Tempest limped back to base on empty tanks after a chase that lasted longer than planned. Nature did not cooperate either. June and July weather over the channel brought turbulence, haze, and frequent headwinds. A 20 miles per hour headwind could slash the Tempest's speed advantage nearly in half. Pilots would finally close on a V-1 only to realize it had already crossed the coast, racing inland toward London. Operating from Newchurch Airfield in Kent, the closest base to the launch sites, No. 486 Squadron began scoring consistent successes by late June. On June 28th, Squadron leader Roland Beaumont destroyed his first V-1 with a 3-second burst, detonating it safely over farmland near Ashford. His combat report repeated a phrase that soon became routine: throttle wide open. He had barely caught the bomb before it reached the balloon defenses ringing London. That was the problem. Pilots were flying at maximum continuous power and still only just keeping up. Only just was no longer acceptable when 100 flying bombs a day were crossing the coast. On July 5th, Squadron leader Joseph Berry of No. 501 Squadron made a decision born of frustration. Chasing a V-1 with the throttle already fully forward and boost at its limit, he watched the bomb begin to pull away. Berry shoved the throttle past the safety gate, into territory clearly marked in red. The Napier Sabre roared. Boost climbed beyond +9 pounds, then higher. The Tempest surged forward violently. Airspeed passed 410, 420, 430 miles per hour. Berry closed rapidly, destroyed the V-1 over Dungeness, and returned to Newchurch expecting a ruined engine. It wasn't. The ground crew found heat damage and discoloration, but the engine had survived. Berry never mentioned the overboost in his report. He didn't need to. Word spread within hours. The Sabre could give you another 20 miles per hour, at least once. Officially, the emergency gate existed for brief combat crises, takeoff from short fields, evasive maneuvers, moments of survival. Napier rated the engine for +9 boost for 5 minutes. Beyond that lay escalating mechanical violence, soaring temperatures, extreme cylinder pressures, sleeve valves operating outside their design limits. The pilots didn't care. Every Tempest squadron faced the same equation: catch the V-1 quickly, or don't catch it at all. By mid-July, overboosting had become standard practice, despite explicit Air Ministry prohibitions. Pilots scrambled, climbed to 3,000 to 5,000 feet, spotted the V-1's exhaust flame, and pushed the throttle through the gate, often holding +11 or +12 boost until either the bomb exploded or the engine began to protest. Flight Lieutenant Remy Van Leerd of No. 609 Squadron, the campaign's top V-1 ace, made the technique an art. He used a shallow dive from 4,000 feet while simultaneously overboosting, stacking gravity and excess power to build closing speed. His combat reports routinely noted exceeded temperature limits and prolonged overboost operation. Beaumont, now commanding No. 150 Wing, knew exactly what his pilots were doing. He flew the same way himself. If courts-martial came, he reasoned, they could start with him. The real gamble was whether the engines would fail catastrophically. They didn't. Through July, the Sabres ran hot, rough, and short-lived, but they ran. Engines required rebuilds after a few dozen hours, but they rarely failed in the air. That fragile line between damage and disaster was what made the tactic viable. The reason lay inside the Sabre itself. This was no ordinary engine. With 24 cylinders in an H configuration and a revolutionary sleeve valve system, it delivered unmatched power for its size. Unlike traditional poppet valves, the Sabre's sleeves distributed heat and stress over a larger surface area, allowing it to tolerate brief extremes that would have destroyed conventional engines. 10 minutes at plus 12 boost might cost you an overhaul, but it probably wouldn't cost you the aircraft. Newchurch became the heart of Britain's V-1 defense. By late July, 5 Tempest squadrons operated from its grass fields, flying up to 100 sorties per day. Pilots slept beside their aircraft. When radar detected incoming bombs, they had 90 seconds to be airborne. There was no time for careful checks. Start the engine, glance at the gauges, and go. The results were decisive. Between mid-June and early September, No. 150 Wing destroyed 832 V-1s, roughly 30% of all fighter interceptions. Barry alone accounted for 61.5 kills. Van Leerd reached 44 confirmed. Engines were changed constantly, some lasting barely 30 operational hours before overboost damage demanded replacement. A typical interception was brutally simple. Radar contact at 20 to 30 miles. Scramble. Climb. Throttle through the gate. Spot the flame from several miles out. Close carefully. Fire too early and you wasted ammunition. Get too close and the warhead might detonate under your nose. Many Tempests returned peppered with shrapnel. By September, Allied troops had overrun most V-1 launch sites in France. The immediate threat began to fade. But the lesson remained unmistakable. The flying bomb had forced fighter command into a new kind of war, one where machinery was pushed beyond its limits, rules were bent until they broke, and victory depended not on comfort or safety, but on extracting every last mile per hour a machine could give. That fragile balance could not last forever. As Allied troops pushed deeper into France, the V-1 launch rate collapsed, falling from more than 100 weapons per day to fewer than 20. The Tempest squadrons had won the interception battle, but the victory came at a steep mechanical and human cost. On the ground, the toll was impossible to ignore. Flight Sergeant Arthur Wilkins, a fitter with No. 501 Squadron, kept a private notebook recording what overboosting was doing to the Sabre engines. His entries from late July were blunt and unsettling. Constant redline temperatures. Sleeves scored and carboned from sustained overboost. Entire cylinders seized, sometimes during landing rolls, when overheated components expanded beyond tolerance and welded themselves to the cylinder walls. What pilots experienced for minutes, ground crews confronted daily. Exhaust stacks glowed red-hot. Oil consumption spiked as lubricants broke down under heat. Spark plugs fouled rapidly. The Sabre's precision machine sleeve valves, built to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, expanded unevenly, accumulating microscopic damage that quickly became terminal wear. In peacetime, a Sabre engine was expected to run 150 hours between major overhauls. During the V-1 campaign, engines at Newchurch averaged 35 to 40 hours. Some failed in less than 20. Wing Commander Roland Beaumont's personal aircraft burned through 4 engines in 10 weeks. The maintenance burden became overwhelming. Each engine change required roughly 40 man-hours, draining fluids, disconnecting controls, lifting the 2,400-pound engine with cranes, installing the replacement, and running tests. Ground crews worked 16-hour shifts through July and August, struggling to keep enough aircraft operational. Replacement engines soon became the bottleneck. Napier simply could not build Sabres as fast as squadrons were destroying them. By early August, entire Tempest flights sat grounded, not for lack of aircraft, but for lack of engines. The Air Ministry responded with a sharply worded technical order. All operations beyond approved boost limits were to cease immediately. Any pilot deliberately exceeding +9 pounds of boost faced disciplinary action, potentially court-martial, for willful damage to government property. Beaumont read the order, filed it, and ignored it. The choice, as he saw it, was stark. Either his pilots abused their engines and stopped the flying bombs, or they obeyed regulations and watched civilians die. Engine longevity was not the priority. Squadron leader Joseph Barry formalized that argument in a memo to the Air Ministry. Between mid-June and early August, his squadron alone had destroyed 123 V-1s. Barry estimated that at least 90% of those interceptions required boost beyond approved limits. Using conservative casualty figures, he calculated that throttle abuse had likely saved hundreds of lives. Was preserving engines worth those deaths? The question reached Air Chief Marshal Roderick Hill. He sided with the pilots. A confidential directive quietly followed. Squadron commanders were granted discretion to exceed boost limits when operationally necessary. Maintenance units would receive priority engine allocations. The threat of courts-martial vanished. Events on the ground soon rendered the debate moot. The Normandy breakout in late July shattered German defenses. American and Canadian forces surged north toward the Pas-de-Calais, overrunning V-1 launch sites faster than German crews could dismantle them. By early September, most ramps had been captured. Launches from France effectively ceased, though sporadic attacks continued from aircraft and sites in the Netherlands. The numbers told the story. Between June 13 and September 5, 1944, Germany launched approximately 9,500 V-1s at Britain. About 4,500 were destroyed by fighters, guns, and balloons. Nearly 4,800 still reached populated areas, killing over 6,000 civilians and injuring 17,000 more. Without the Tempests, and without throttle abuse, those figures would have been far worse. Operational research showed that staying within boost limits would have reduced interception speed by 15 to 20 miles per hour, shrinking the engagement window and allowing many more V-1s to reach London. Number 150 Wing's 832 kills alone likely prevented well over 1,000 civilian deaths. The psychological effect mattered as much as the statistics. By late June, morale in southeast England had been collapsing. The V-1 felt unstoppable. People fled London. Factory output faltered. But as Tempests prowled the skies and buzz bombs began exploding harmlessly over fields instead of streets, confidence returned. Civilians could see their air force fighting back. By mid-September, the crisis had passed. Tempest squadrons returned to ground attack and escort duties. The Sabre engines, finally spared abuse, could operate within their intended limits. After the war, Napier engineers examined Sabres that had survived the campaign. They were astonished. Where patterns suggested engines that should have failed catastrophically had endured pressures 30% beyond design limits. Some sleeves bore microscopic cracks that never propagated. The engines had survived on a margin no one had knowingly designed. The RAF absorbed the lesson. Emergency power was no longer treated as an absolute taboo, but as a calculated risk. That philosophy shaped post-war aviation. British, American, and Soviet interceptors all incorporated systems allowing pilots to trade engine life for speed when it mattered most. From the Tempest Sabre, to Cold War interceptors, to modern fighters, the lesson endured. Sometimes the red line is not a boundary. Sometimes it is a decision. And in the summer of 1944, British pilots chose to cross it, because on the other side were thousands of lives.